I'm going to be honest with you about something, and I hope you'll hear me out before you scroll to the comments. I have watched SpongeBob SquarePants more times than any reasonable adult should admit to. I've gone through the entire first 3 seasons, back to back, on more nights than I can count. I've sat through the later seasons with a notebook open, trying to figure out exactly where things shifted, and why. I've read interviews. I've gone through production timelines. I've fallen down rabbit holes on fan forums at 3 in the morning when I should have been asleep hours ago. And after all of that, after all those hours and all those rewatches, I need to tell you something that I genuinely believe and that I don't think gets said enough. Sandy Cheeks is the most underrated character in the entire SpongeBob SquarePants universe. And it's not even close. Now hold on. I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, okay, sure, Sandy's cool. She does karate, she's from Texas, she lives in a dome, but she's not SpongeBob. She's not Squidward. She doesn't have the meme legacy of Patrick or the sheer quotable energy of Mr. Krabs. And you're right about all of that. But here's the thing that I keep coming back to every single time I rewatch this show. Sandy Cheeks is doing something in this series that no other character is doing. She's carrying weight that nobody talks about. She's serving a purpose in the storytelling that goes so far beyond being the smart friend, or the tough friend, or the Texas friend. And I think if you actually sit with her episodes, if you actually pay attention to what the writers are doing with her, especially in those first 3 seasons, you start to realize that this character was built to say something that the rest of the cast couldn't say on their own. Tonight, we're going through all of it. Every major Sandy episode. Every overlooked moment. Every piece of her character that I think deserves a much harder look than it's ever gotten. We're going to talk about why Steven Hillenburg created her the way he did, what Carolyn Lawrence brought to that role that nobody else could have, and why I think the way this show treated Sandy, especially in the later seasons, tells you everything you need to know about what happens when a show loses sight of its own best ideas. So if you're watching this late at night, get comfortable. Grab a blanket, turn the lights down, do whatever you need to do, because we're going to be here for a while. And if you haven't subscribed yet, it really does help us keep making these for you. Just a tap. That's it. Okay, let's get into it. The first time you ever see Sandy Cheeks on screen is May 1st, 1999. The episode is Tea at the Tree Dome, which is the 3rd segment of the very first episode of SpongeBob SquarePants, paired with Help Wanted and Reef Blower. And I want you to think about what a massive creative decision that is. The show hasn't even gotten through its premiere episode yet, and Hillenburg is already introducing a land animal. He's already breaking the rules of his own world. SpongeBob lives in a pineapple under the sea. Patrick lives under a rock. Squidward lives in an Easter Island head. Everything about Bikini Bottom is designed to feel like a self-contained underwater ecosystem. And then, into that world, walks a squirrel. From Texas, wearing a spacesuit, with an air dome full of grass and a picnic table, and a giant oak tree sitting at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. And here's the part that gets me about that first episode. SpongeBob meets Sandy while she's wrestling a giant clam. Not hiding from a clam, not running from a clam, wrestling it. She's got it in a headlock. She's in full control. SpongeBob tries to help and immediately gets swallowed, and Sandy has to rescue him. That's her introduction. Before we know her name, before we know where she's from, before we hear the accent or see the tree dome, we know that Sandy Cheeks is tougher than SpongeBob. She's competent. She's physical. She's not the one who needs saving. She's the one doing the saving. And I want to be clear about the context of this introduction, because I think it matters for understanding what Hillenburg was doing. In 1999, children's animation was dominated by characters who fit neatly into archetypes: the hero, the sidekick, the villain, the love interest. And when you introduced a female character, especially in a show with a predominantly male cast, the default was to make her one of 2 things: the damsel or the mom friend. Those were the templates. Those were what networks expected. And Sandy is neither. She's not there to be rescued. She's not there to nurture. She walks on screen, and the first thing she does is demonstrate physical dominance over a creature many times her size. That's a statement. That's Hillenburg saying, right from the jump, this character is not what you think she is. And I think about his background when I consider this choice. Hillenburg spent years working at the Ocean Institute in Dana Point, California, teaching marine biology to kids. He took them on boats, showed them tide pools, introduced them to sea urchins and starfish and hermit crabs, and somewhere in that process, he developed an appreciation for organisms that survive in environments they weren't designed for. That's the central fascination of marine biology, really. How does life persist in the dark? In the cold? In the crushing pressure of the deep ocean? How do organisms adapt, survive, thrive in conditions that should kill them? And when Hillenburg created Sandy Cheeks, he took that fascination and flipped it. Instead of asking, how does sea life survive in extreme ocean conditions, he asked, how would a land animal survive underwater? And the answer he came up with was, through sheer will, through ingenuity, through building your own ecosystem and carrying it with you, through being Sandy Cheeks. And then, the episode does something that I think is genuinely clever. SpongeBob goes to Sandy's tree dome for tea, and because he doesn't know what air is, because he's a sea creature and has literally never encountered the concept of a breathable atmosphere, he starts drying out. He's shriveling up. He can't breathe. Patrick comes along, and he starts drying out too. And rather than immediately rushing to help them, rather than being the nurturing caretaker character that a lesser show would have made her, Sandy just doesn't notice at first. She's making tea. She's talking about Texas. She's being herself in her own space. It's only when she turns around and sees that SpongeBob and Patrick have literally become dried out husks that she snaps into action and brings them water helmets. That scene tells you so much about who Sandy is. She's hospitable, she's generous, but she's not watching over everyone. She's not defined by her relationships to the male characters. She's living her life, in her space, on her terms, and the comedy comes from the collision between her world and SpongeBob's world. That's not a sidekick. That's a fully realized character who happens to exist in a radically different context from everyone around her. I've been rewatching the first season specifically to track how Sandy is used in those early episodes, and there's a pattern that I don't think gets enough attention. She shows up in Sandy's Rocket, which is Season 1, Episode 8A, aired September 17th, 1999. In that episode, Sandy has built a rocket. Not bought a rocket. Not found a rocket. Built one. She's planning a trip to the moon to collect samples. She's doing science. And SpongeBob and Patrick sneak aboard, accidentally launch it, and then convince themselves they've landed on the moon when really they're still in Bikini Bottom, and they start capturing everyone thinking they're aliens. It's a brilliant episode, one of the best in the first season, and the thing I keep coming back to is that Sandy's role in it is as the competent adult in the room. She built the thing. She had a plan. The chaos only happens because SpongeBob and Patrick disrupted her careful work. That's her dynamic with the show in a nutshell, right there, in her second major appearance. Then you get Karate Choppers, Season 1, Episode 14B, which aired on December 31st, 1999. Literally the last SpongeBob episode to air in the 90s. And this is the episode that establishes the karate dynamic between Sandy and SpongeBob. They're sparring. They're ambushing each other around Bikini Bottom. Mr. Krabs tells SpongeBob to stop doing karate or he's fired, and the rest of the episode is SpongeBob trying to resist the urge to chop while Sandy keeps provoking him. And what I love about this one, what I think people completely miss, is that karate is the thing that connects Sandy and SpongeBob on a level that has nothing to do with anyone else. Patrick doesn't do karate. Squidward doesn't do karate. This is their thing, their private language, and it establishes Sandy not just as SpongeBob's friend, but as his equal in a specific discipline. She's not better than him at karate. She's not worse. They're matched. And in a show that usually puts SpongeBob at a disadvantage in some way, that equality matters. And the thing about Karate Choppers that really sticks with me is the final scene. SpongeBob and Sandy are in the park. They've been told to stop doing karate. They're trying to have a normal day, just two friends having a picnic. And the tension is unbearable, in the best way, because you can see it in their faces. They want to chop. They need to chop. The karate isn't just a hobby for them. It's how they communicate. It's how they express the friendship. And when they finally break and start karate chopping the sandwich ingredients and having their fight in the middle of making lunch, turning food preparation into a martial arts sequence, it's one of the most joyful things in the entire first season. because the show is saying that these two people can't not be themselves around each other. Their energy, their competitive spirit, their physical language of friendship, it can't be suppressed. It can't be contained. It just comes out. And I think about that a lot when I compare Sandy to the other female characters that were on television in 1999. Because things were different then. You had Dora in 2000. Kim Possible didn't start until 2002. And the Powerpuff Girls were around, but they were explicitly about girl power as a concept. Sandy was never about girl power as a concept. Sandy was just powerful. There's a difference. She didn't exist to make a point about gender. She existed to make a point about character. And that subtlety, that refusal to turn her strength into a message, rather than just letting it be a trait, is something I think was ahead of its time. I actually have a theory about this that I've never heard anyone else bring up. I think Hillenburg deliberately designed Sandy to be the one character who SpongeBob never needs to impress, never needs to prove himself to, and never needs to protect. With Patrick, SpongeBob is often the more capable one. With Squidward, SpongeBob is the annoying intrusion. With Mr. Krabs, SpongeBob is the devoted employee. With Mrs. Puff, he's the hopeless student. But with Sandy, it's just two people who respect each other. Two people who genuinely enjoy each other's company. And I think that's by design. I think Hillenburg wanted one relationship in SpongeBob's life that was completely balanced, and he gave that relationship to Sandy. And there's another early episode I want to mention before we move on, because I think it gets overlooked, and it's really important for understanding Sandy's role in the show's ensemble. There are a number of Season 1 episodes where Sandy appears briefly but meaningfully. Episodes where she's not the focus, but where her presence shifts the dynamic in the room. She'll show up at the Krusty Krab, and suddenly, the energy changes. SpongeBob stands a little taller. The conversation gets a little sharper. And I think that's intentional. I think the writers understood that Sandy's presence raises the bar. When she's in a scene, the other characters have to step up, because Sandy doesn't suffer fools. She's polite about it, mostly, but she's not going to pretend that something stupid isn't stupid. And that creates a different chemistry than you get in scenes with just SpongeBob and Patrick, where the stupidity is the point. I also want to mention something about the visual design of Sandy's character, because I think the animators deserve credit for what they did. Sandy's design is deceptively simple. She's a brown squirrel in a white spacesuit with a glass dome on her head. But watch how the animators use that suit. When Sandy is happy, the suit almost seems to expand. She takes up more space. Her posture opens up. When she's sad or defeated, the suit seems to shrink around her. She curls in, and the glass helmet, that transparent barrier between her face and the ocean, becomes this incredibly expressive storytelling device. You can see Sandy's whole face at all times, every expression, every micro-emotion, but she's always behind glass, always separated by a thin layer from the world she's trying to connect with. The animators didn't have to design it that way. They could have given her an opaque suit, or a suit that covered more of her face, but they chose transparency. They chose to let you see everything Sandy is feeling, while simultaneously showing you the barrier between her and everyone else. That's visual storytelling of the highest order, and in a show with this much visual density, I think it goes unappreciated. Okay, so let me talk about Texas. Season 1, Episode 18. Aired March 22nd, 2000. And honestly, this might be the episode that made me realize Sandy was something special. Because this is the episode where Sandy gets homesick. She misses Texas. She sings a song about it. This genuinely beautiful country ballad where she's sitting on top of her tree dome. And the sky is painted in these warm sunset colors, and you can hear the ache in her voice. Junior Brown actually sings the final line of the song, and the whole thing has this weight to it that a lot of Season 1 SpongeBob doesn't have. The show was still finding its emotional range at that point, and Texas is one of the first episodes where it really reaches for something tender. And here's what kills me about this episode. Sandy is genuinely considering leaving. She's packed her bags. She's ready to go back to the surface. And SpongeBob and Patrick's plan to keep her isn't to sit her down and have a heartfelt conversation about how much she means to them. Their plan is to throw her a surprise party at the Krusty Krab and lure her there by insulting Texas until she's so angry she chases them. It's absurd. It's hilarious. Patrick screams insults about Texas while Sandy chases them through Bikini Bottom like a freight train. But the punchline, the actual landing of the episode, is when Sandy gets to the Krusty Krab and everyone yells her name and the whole place is decorated in Texas themes. And Sandy realizes she's been home all along, that her friends are her home, that Bikini Bottom is where she belongs. Not because it's where she's from, but because it's where the people who care about her are. Think about that for a second. This is a kids' show on Nickelodeon in the year 2000, and it's making a really sophisticated point about the difference between where you come from and where you belong. Sandy is a transplant. She's the only land creature in an underwater city. She's literally surrounded by an entirely different species, breathing a different substance, living in a bubble that separates her from everyone around her. And the show is saying, you can still belong. You can build a home somewhere that doesn't look like where you started. And the people around you can make that home real, even if they don't fully understand your world, even if they've never seen a prairie, or heard a country song, or eaten barbecue, or felt the sun. And if you're listening to this late at night, if you're in bed right now and the room is dark and you're just letting this wash over you, I want you to sit with that image for a second. Sandy in the Krusty Krab, surrounded by people who are different from her in every conceivable way. Fish and crabs and sponges and starfish, and she looks around and she knows, she just knows, that this is where she's supposed to be. Not because the ocean feels like Texas. It doesn't. It will never feel like Texas. But because the people in it feel like home. I need you to think about what a radical message that is for a character in a cartoon that aired 26 years ago. Because that's an immigration story. That's a story about finding community as an outsider. That's a story about identity and displacement, and the kind of loneliness that comes from being the only one of your kind in a place that wasn't built for you. And the show trusts Sandy to carry all of that. Not SpongeBob, not Squidward, Sandy. And then season 2 comes along, and the writers go even further. Squirrel jokes. Season 2, episode 11B, aired September 14th, 2001. I've rewatched this episode probably 6 times putting this together, and it hits different every time. Because this is the one where SpongeBob does stand-up comedy at the Krusty Krab, bombs with his original material, and then starts telling jokes about squirrels, about how squirrels are stupid, about how squirrels smell bad, about how squirrels have big teeth and tiny brains. And the audience, the fish of Bikini Bottom, love it. They're laughing hysterically. They can't get enough. And Sandy is sitting right there, in the audience, watching her friend reduce her entire identity to a punchline. And here's what the show does that I think is kind of extraordinary for a Nickelodeon cartoon. It doesn't just show Sandy being offended, it shows the consequences. After SpongeBob's comedy set, the citizens of Bikini Bottom start treating Sandy differently. They mock her. They assume she's stupid. A parent pulls their child away from her, literally afraid that their kid will catch her stupid. Sandy walks through her own town, a town she chose, a town she gave up Texas for, and she's being discriminated against because of what she is. Look, I've watched a lot of SpongeBob, and this might be one of the most quietly devastating things this show ever put on screen, because it's not played for laughs. Sandy's pain is real. The discrimination is real. The show is using its own absurd world, a world of talking fish and underwater fires, to tell a story about what happens when you turn a minority group into a joke. When you reduce someone to their differences. When the majority decides that your existence is funny. That's what Squirrel Jokes is actually about. It's about racism. It's about prejudice. It's about how humor can be weaponized against the people who are already the most vulnerable. And the character who has to carry all of that weight is Sandy Cheeks. I want to slow down here because I think this scene, Sandy walking through the streets of Bikini Bottom while people hurl insults at her, is one of the most important scenes in the entire show. And I don't just mean for Sandy's character. I mean for what SpongeBob SquarePants is willing to be. Because this is a show that people dismiss as silly, as surface level, as just a funny cartoon about a sponge. And then it turns around and gives you a sequence that's basically a child-friendly depiction of how prejudice infects a community. The fish aren't being malicious because they're bad people. They're being malicious because SpongeBob's jokes gave them permission. He normalized the mockery. He made it socially acceptable to look at Sandy and see a stereotype instead of a person. And the speed at which the entire town turned on her, the ease of it, the casualness, that's the scariest part. It didn't take a villain. It didn't take a scheme. It just took a joke that landed well enough for people to think, oh, I guess it's okay to treat squirrels like that. This is one of those episodes I think about randomly at like 2 a.m. Not because it's the funniest or the most exciting, but because it's the truest. It captures something about how discrimination works in the real world that a lot of adult shows can't even pull off. And it does it in 11 minutes on a Saturday morning on Nickelodeon, with a cartoon squirrel. And the ending of that episode is perfect in a way that I don't think people give it enough credit for. Sandy doesn't just confront SpongeBob, she teaches him a lesson by showing up at his next set and exaggerating every squirrel stereotype to absurd proportions. She puts on buck teeth. She acts stupid on purpose. She forces SpongeBob to see what he's been doing, reflected back at him in the most uncomfortable way possible. And SpongeBob, to his credit, gets it. He shifts his comedy to making fun of everyone equally, himself included. But the damage is already done. We've already seen how easy it was for an entire community to turn on someone because they were different. And that moment, that image of Sandy walking through Bikini Bottom being mocked by the people she thought were her neighbors, sticks with you. I keep coming back to that point because I think it's the key to everything about Sandy's character. She's the outsider, always. Even when she's accepted, even when she's loved, even when she's throwing SpongeBob across a field in a karate match, she's still the one who lives in a bubble. She's still the one who has to put on a suit to walk outside her front door. She's still the one who breathes a different substance than everyone around her. And the show knows this. The show uses this. But I don't think the audience always gives Sandy credit for what she's carrying. Let me jump to Pre-Hibernation Week, Season 2, Episode 27A, aired May 5th, 2001. And this one's a ride. Sandy is about to go into hibernation for the winter, and before she does, she wants to pack in as much extreme activity as possible with SpongeBob. And I mean extreme. We're talking sandboarding down a mountain, jousting on top of the sea needle, playing Find the Hay in the Needle Stack, which is literally just diving headfirst into a pile of needles. Sandy is a maniac in this episode. She's relentless. She's terrifying. And SpongeBob is absolutely not having a good time. And here's the thing about Pre-Hibernation Week that I think people miss. On the surface, it's a comedy episode about Sandy being too intense. She's dragging SpongeBob through increasingly dangerous activities. And the joke is that she's so driven, so competitive, so determined to squeeze every last drop out of life before she sleeps for months, that she doesn't realize she's basically torturing her best friend. But underneath that, there's something genuinely emotional happening. Sandy is afraid. She's afraid of the pause. She's afraid of losing time. She's about to go unconscious for an entire season, and the thought of wasting a single moment before that happens is unbearable to her. I don't know if the writers intended it this way, but every time I watch this episode, I think about how that fear of lost time is something a lot of people carry. The idea that if you stop moving, if you slow down, if you let yourself rest, you'll miss something, you'll lose something, you'll wake up and the world will have moved on without you. And Sandy, who already lives in a bubble, who already exists at a distance from everyone around her, feels that more than anyone else in Bikini Bottom. She literally disappears for months, and when she comes back, life just kept going. SpongeBob kept flipping burgers. Patrick kept sitting under his rock. Squidward kept hating everything. The world doesn't stop for Sandy's hibernation. And I think part of her terror in Pre-Hibernation Week is the knowledge that it won't. And I want to add something here about Pre-Hibernation Week that I think connects to a larger pattern in the show. When Sandy is finally out of the picture, when she goes into hibernation and disappears from the story, Bikini Bottom falls apart looking for SpongeBob. Sandy literally tears the town apart, searching for him. She rips buildings out of the ground. She interrogates citizens. She organizes search parties. The entire city is terrorized by this frantic squirrel who cannot accept that her friend might be gone. And the visual of it, Sandy rampaging through Bikini Bottom like a force of nature, tossing buildings aside, screaming SpongeBob's name. It's comedy, obviously, but it's also a portrait of someone who doesn't know how to process the possibility of loss. Sandy doesn't do grief. She doesn't do helplessness. She does action. She does effort. She does more. And when more isn't enough, she does even more, until she crashes. That's a pattern you'll see repeated throughout the show. This idea that Sandy's greatest strength and her greatest vulnerability are the same thing. Her refusal to stop. Her inability to accept that some things can't be fixed by trying harder. It comes back in Sandy, SpongeBob, and the Worm. It comes back in Chimps Ahoy. It comes back every time Sandy faces a challenge, and her first instinct is to punch it into submission. And the show, at its best, understands that this isn't just funny. It's sad. It's the coping mechanism of someone who learned early that if she wasn't the toughest, the strongest, the most prepared, she'd have no place in a world that wasn't designed to include her. Now, Survival of the Idiots follows pretty closely in the timeline. It's Season 2, Episode 29A, and it aired in early 2001, though there's some dispute about the exact premiere date because early SpongeBob airing schedules were genuinely chaotic. But the content of the episode is crystal clear. SpongeBob and Patrick sneak into Sandy's tree dome while she's hibernating. They see her sleeping, and she's enormous. She's been eating through the fall, building up fat reserves, and now she's this massive, round, hibernating squirrel wrapped up in a tree. And it's winter inside the dome. Snow everywhere. Freezing. And I'll be honest with you, this episode made me laugh harder than almost any other Sandy episode because the visual comedy is perfect. SpongeBob and Patrick playing in the snow, not realizing that Sandy is going to wake up if they make too much noise. Sandy sleep fighting, thrashing around, and beating them senseless while still unconscious, shouting about being Dirty Dan and Pinhead Larry. The whole thing escalates until Sandy rips their fur off, because in her dream, she's apparently some kind of frontier outlaw, and SpongeBob and Patrick have to fashion clothes out of each other to survive. But underneath the slapstick, this episode is showing you something about Sandy that I think is really important. It's showing you her private life. The tree dome is Sandy's space. It's where she doesn't have to wear the suit, where she doesn't have to be the strong one, the smart one, the capable one, where she's just a squirrel in a tree, doing what squirrels do, hibernating, sleeping, being an animal, and SpongeBob and Patrick's intrusion into that space, their complete inability to respect the boundary of do not disturb, is both the comedy of the episode and, if you want to read it that way, a commentary on how Sandy's privacy is constantly violated by the people around her. She sets up clear rules. She puts up a sign that literally says, "Keep out," and they walk right past it because they want something from her. I've been thinking about that a lot recently, about how Sandy is constantly asked to be available, to be tough, to be smart, to solve problems, to wrestle worms, and build rockets, and invent things, and save the day. And the one time she needs to just be left alone, to do the most natural thing in the world for her species. She can't even have that. Even her sleep gets invaded. Alright, let me talk about pressure, because this one's a banger, and it ties directly into everything I've been saying. Season 2, Episode 12, A, aired in 2001. Sandy and the boys get into a debate about whether land creatures or sea creatures are better. Sandy says land creatures are superior. SpongeBob, Patrick, Squidward, and Mr. Krabs say sea creatures are better. And the whole episode becomes this escalating competition where they try to one-up each other. And eventually, Sandy takes off her helmet and tries to breathe underwater, while SpongeBob and the others go up to the surface and try to survive on land. And the moment that gets me, the moment that genuinely makes me sit up every time, is when Sandy takes her helmet off. Because she does it. She actually does it. She rips the helmet off in the middle of the ocean and holds her breath, cheeks puffed out, eyes wide, and for a few seconds, she's just standing there, completely exposed, completely vulnerable, refusing to give in. And it's played as comedy. Of course it is. But there's something underneath it that I think is really moving. Sandy would rather put herself in genuine danger than admit she can't keep up. She would rather suffocate than concede that she doesn't belong here. That's not arrogance. That's stubbornness born out of something much deeper. That's the stubbornness of someone who has spent their entire life proving that they deserve to be in the room. And here's the thing I need you to understand about pressure. The episode doesn't pick a winner. Both sides fail. Sandy can't breathe underwater. The sea creatures can't survive on land. The seagulls almost eat them. Everyone retreats to safety. And at the end, they're all sitting there, exhausted. And they've basically proven that neither world is better. That you need your own environment to survive. That adaptation has limits. And that the bravest thing any of them did in that episode was try to exist somewhere they weren't designed for. Which is what Sandy does every single day. Remember what I said earlier about Sandy being the character who carries the outsider narrative. Pressure is that idea crystallized into 11 minutes. She's fighting for her right to be here. She's fighting against 4 other characters who are, without even realizing it, telling her she doesn't belong. And she fights them to a draw. Not a win. A draw. And the show lets that be enough. I want to jump to Sandy, SpongeBob, and the Worm now. Season 2, Episode 40, A, aired October 12th, 2001. This is the one with the Alaskan bullworm. A massive, terrifying worm attacks Bikini Bottom, eating buildings, tearing through the town, and the citizens are panicking. And Sandy marches up and says she'll handle it. She's confident. She's brave. She's practically bouncing off the walls with excitement. And SpongeBob, for once, is the one trying to talk her down. He's terrified. He's seen the worm. He knows how big it is. And he spends most of the episode trying to convince Sandy that this thing is too much for her. And Sandy doesn't listen. Of course she doesn't. Because Sandy Cheeks does not back down. That's her defining trait. And it's the thing that makes her both admirable and, occasionally, genuinely frustrating. She chases the worm. She finds what she thinks is the worm's tongue. She starts wrangling it. She's got it pinned. She's riding it like a rodeo bull. And then the camera pulls back, and you realize that what Sandy thought was the entire worm was actually just its tongue. The real worm is enormous. Unfathomably massive. It takes up the entire background. Sandy's face drops. SpongeBob's face drops. And then the worm falls on the city that Patrick and the citizens of Bikini Bottom pushed to a new location, thinking they were safe. Now, a lot of people read this episode as the show humbling Sandy. As the show saying, okay, you're tough, but you're not invincible. And there's some truth to that. But I think there's something else going on too. I think this is the show acknowledging that Sandy's confidence, her refusal to back down, her absolute conviction that she can handle anything, is both her greatest strength and her blind spot. She doesn't just refuse to admit weakness. She genuinely doesn't see it. She can't conceive of a challenge she can't meet. And in Bikini Bottom, where she's already the toughest creature by a huge margin, that belief has been consistently reinforced. Nobody in this town is stronger than Sandy. Nobody is faster. Nobody is more physically capable. So when something comes along that actually outclasses her, she doesn't have the framework to process it. She's never needed one. And I need to point out something about this episode that I think gets lost in the comedy. When the camera pulls back and reveals the true size of the Alaskan bullworm, Sandy's face changes. And it's not just surprise. It's not just fear. There's this micro moment, this fraction of a second, where Sandy looks genuinely lost. She doesn't know what to do. She doesn't have a plan B. She's been so certain, so completely convinced that she could handle this, that she never considered what she would do if she couldn't. And that moment of being lost, that brief crack in her armor, is maybe the most human Sandy has ever looked on screen. Because we all know that feeling. That moment when you realize you've been operating on confidence alone, and the foundation just collapsed. The thing about SpongeBob is that it rewards rewatching in a way that almost no other animated show does. Every single time, you catch something you missed. And with Sandy, what I keep catching on rewatches is the subtlety of the animation in her face. the early seasons especially. The animators gave her these tiny expressions, these fleeting moments of emotion that pass in a frame or two, and if you're not looking for them, you miss them entirely. But they're there. A flash of loneliness when she's looking out her dome at the ocean. A moment of hesitation before she puts on her helmet. A flicker of something in her eyes when SpongeBob mentions the surface. These aren't accidents. These are choices, and they add up to a portrait of someone who is more complicated than she lets the world see. And that's a really sophisticated piece of character writing for a show about a sponge, because it's saying that strength can become its own kind of blindness. That competence, when it goes unchallenged for long enough, can calcify into overconfidence. And that the person who's always the strongest in the room might be the least prepared for the moment when they're not. And that connects to something broader about SpongeBob's worldview that I've been chewing on. This show, at its core, is about people who are stuck. SpongeBob is stuck at the Krusty Krab. Squidward is stuck next to SpongeBob. Mr. Krabs is stuck chasing money. Plankton is stuck chasing the formula. Mrs. Puff is stuck teaching a student who will never pass. Everyone in Bikini Bottom is in a loop. And Sandy? Sandy isn't stuck. Sandy chose to be here. Sandy could leave. At any point, she could take off the helmet, walk to the surface, and go back to a life where she doesn't have to fight for every breath. But she doesn't. And the fact that she's the only main character who stays by choice, not by circumstance, makes her presence in Bikini Bottom mean something different from everyone else's. Every other character is there because they have to be. Sandy is there because she wants to be. And that distinction, that voluntariness, is what gives her story its edge. Because when you choose something, when you opt in, the costs hit differently. You can't blame anyone else. You can't say the world forced you into this. You looked at the ocean, and the dome, and the suit, and the isolation, and you said yes. That's a different kind of brave than anything SpongeBob does. Speaking of rewatching, I want to go back to something from Season 2 that I think is one of the most quietly brilliant Sandy episodes. Wormy, Season 2, Episode 5, A, aired February 25th, 2001. Now, Sandy isn't actually in most of this episode. She's out of town, but the episode revolves entirely around her world. SpongeBob and Patrick are tasked with pet-sitting Sandy's animals while she's away, and they become attached to a caterpillar named Wormy. They love Wormy. They bond with him. They have an entire day of fun with this little caterpillar. And then overnight, Wormy transforms into a butterfly, and SpongeBob and Patrick are absolutely convinced that this butterfly is a terrifying monster that ate their friend. The whole town panics. Buildings are destroyed. Everyone is screaming. And it's all because SpongeBob and Patrick don't understand metamorphosis. They don't understand that transformation is natural. That something can look completely different and still be the same creature. And I think about Sandy when I watch this episode, even though she's barely in it, because Sandy is the character in SpongeBob who understands transformation better than anyone. She left her entire world behind. She changed her environment. She adapted. She became something different from what she was. And the people of Bikini Bottom, the same people who panicked over a butterfly because they couldn't recognize change, are the people Sandy chose to live among. And I want to extend this thought a little further, because there's another dimension to Wormy that I think connects to Sandy's role in the show's ecosystem. The funniest and most terrifying part of the episode is the close-up of the real butterfly. The show cuts to a live-action close-up of a butterfly's face, and it's hideous. It's this bug-eyed, antenna-twitching, genuinely unsettling piece of real footage spliced into a cartoon. Kids were traumatized by it. Adults were confused by it. And the show played it completely straight, using the butterfly's real appearance to generate genuine fear in a way that nothing else in the show had done at that point. And here's the connection to Sandy. That close-up of the real butterfly is one of the few moments in SpongeBob where the real world intrudes into the cartoon world. And that intrusion causes panic, chaos. The entire town burns down over a butterfly because the citizens of Bikini Bottom don't know how to handle reality. They live in a cartoon. They live in a world of underwater fires and talking jellyfish and a fry cook who sleeps in a pineapple. And when the real world shows up, when something from outside their bubble appears, they can't cope. They can't process it. They destroy themselves trying to fight something that, in reality, is completely harmless. And Sandy is the character who lives in the intersection between those two worlds every single day. She came from the real world. She came from the surface, from Texas, from a place with actual weather and actual physics and actual butterflies that don't cause mass panic. And she moved into the cartoon. And the fact that she can navigate both, that she can exist in SpongeBob's absurd underwater world without losing her grip on reality, is maybe the most underappreciated aspect of her character. Sandy is the only character in SpongeBob who knows what's real, who has context, who can look at a butterfly and say, that's just a butterfly, because she comes from a world where butterflies are normal. I don't know if the writers intended that parallel. I honestly don't. But every time I watch Wormy, I think about how Sandy would have handled the situation if she'd been there. She would have looked at the butterfly and known exactly what it was. Because Sandy understands that things change, that you can start as one thing and become another. That transformation isn't destruction, and nobody in Bikini Bottom gets that the way she does. Because nobody in Bikini Bottom has done what she's done. I want to pause for a second and talk about something that's been on my mind the whole time I've been putting this together. I keep seeing, in fan discussions and on forums and in comment sections, people ranking SpongeBob characters, and Sandy is almost never in the top 3. Sometimes she's not even in the top 5, and the rankings usually go SpongeBob, Squidward, Patrick, Mr. Krabs, Plankton, and then Sandy somewhere after. And every time I see that, I think, do these people not realize what they're looking at? Do they not see that Sandy is the load-bearing wall of this entire show? Take Sandy out of SpongeBob SquarePants, and what do you have? You have a group of sea creatures living in an isolated underwater bubble with no connection to the outside world. You have a show with no external perspective, no cultural friction, no thematic tension between belonging and not belonging. You lose Texas. You lose squirrel jokes. You lose pressure. You lose every scene where the fundamental question of what are you doing here gives the comedy an extra layer of meaning. And I think the reason Sandy gets ranked lower isn't that she's a worse character. It's that she's a more subtle one. SpongeBob's appeal is immediate. Squidward's misery is relatable. Patrick's stupidity is funny. Sandy's complexity requires you to pay attention. It requires you to look past the surface, past the action hero stuff, and the Texas accent, and the karate, and see what the show is actually saying through her. And most people, especially if they're watching SpongeBob casually, if they're watching it as background noise or comfort content, don't look that deep. They take Sandy at face value. The tough friend, the smart friend, the one with the dome. And they move on. And she deserves so much more than that. Okay, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about something that genuinely frustrates me. And this is where my thesis starts to get a little sharper. So stay with me. Because if you've made it this far, you already know this isn't a light video. I think the later seasons of SpongeBob SquarePants did Sandy Cheeks dirty. And I'm not just talking about the general decline in quality that everyone discusses when they talk about seasons 6, 7, and 8. I'm talking specifically about how the writers narrowed Sandy's character to the point where she was barely recognizable. In those first 3 seasons, under Steven Hillenburg's direct creative vision, Sandy was a karate fighter. She was a rodeo champion. She was a Texan with fierce pride in her heritage. She was an inventor. She was a friend. She was tough and vulnerable, and funny and competitive and layered. She contained multitudes. She was one of the most well-rounded characters in the entire show, and then Hillenburg stepped back after the first movie in 2004. The SpongeBob SquarePants movie was supposed to be the ending. Hillenburg designed it that way. That was his intended finale for the series. But Nickelodeon looked at the ratings, looked at the merchandise revenue, looked at the absolute commercial juggernaut that SpongeBob had become, and said, no, more episodes. Keep going. And Hillenburg stepped away from day-to-day show running, and the show continued without his direct guidance, and something happened to Sandy. She became the science character. That was it. That was her whole thing. And I know some of you might be thinking, well, she was always a scientist. What's the difference? And the difference is everything. In season 1, Sandy builds a rocket because she wants to go to the moon. In Season 6, Sandy builds an invention because the plot requires her to build an invention. Do you see the gap? In the first version, Sandy has agency. She has desire. The rocket exists because Sandy as a person wanted to go to space. In the second version, Sandy is a function of the plot machinery. She invents things because someone needs to invent things, and she's the smart one. The motivation is gone. The character is gone. What's left is a skill set in a spacesuit. And I want to be really specific about this, because I think specificity matters. In Season 1, Sandy does karate. She wrestles clams. She sandboards. She builds rockets. She sings country songs. She hosts tea parties. She gets homesick. She gets angry. She gets proud. She gets competitive. In Season 4 through 8, Sandy does science. She occasionally does karate. She occasionally gets angry. But the range, the breadth of who she is, contracts. She goes from being a person who happens to be good at science to being a scientist who happens to be a person. And that distinction, which might sound like I'm splitting hairs, is the difference between a character and a type. Season 4, Season 5, Season 6, and beyond, Sandy's primary function in most episodes was to be the one who invents something, or explains something, or has a lab full of gadgets. And look, I get it. Sandy is smart. Sandy is a scientist. That's always been part of who she is. But in the early seasons, it was one part. One facet of a complex character. In the later seasons, it became the only part. The karate largely disappeared. The Texas pride became an occasional punchline rather than a genuine character trait. The competitiveness softened. The physicality faded. Sandy went from being a fully realized person to being a function. She became the exposition character. The one who shows up with an invention that drives the plot and then either disappears or stands around while SpongeBob and Patrick do the funny stuff. And that makes me angry. I know that's a strong word to use about a cartoon squirrel, but I think it's warranted. Because what they did to Sandy is what a lot of shows do to their female characters when the people who created them leave the room. They simplify. They flatten. They take the one trait that's easiest to write for, and they lean into it until everything else falls away. Sandy didn't get dumber in the later seasons. She got smaller. Her world got smaller. Her role got smaller. And I think that's a disservice to what Hillenburg built. Take Chimps Ahoy, for instance. Season 4, Episode 10B, aired May 5th, 2006. In this episode, Sandy's bosses, a trio of chimpanzees who fund her research, come to check on her progress. If they don't like what she's invented, she loses her funding and has to leave Bikini Bottom. And the premise is fine. It's a decent setup. But the execution reduces Sandy to a one-dimensional scientist character who's anxious about impressing her bosses. SpongeBob and Patrick end up accidentally inventing the gadget that saves the day, a banana peeler, and Sandy gets the credit. And on paper, that sounds like a Sandy episode. But compare it to Texas. Compare it to squirrel jokes. Compare it to pre-hibernation week. Where's the depth? Where's the emotional complexity? Where's the sense that Sandy is a real person with a real inner life? It's not there. And I think a big part of why Sandy is considered underrated is because the later seasons trained the audience to see her as a minor character. If you grew up watching seasons 6, 7, and 8, your version of Sandy is the science one, the lab coat one, the one who shows up for a B-plot about an invention gone wrong, and then goes back to her tree dome. And that version is fine. It's competent. It's not offensive. But it's a shadow of what Sandy was, and what she was capable of being. I've rewatched Someone's in the Kitchen with Sandy more times than I should have for how uncomfortable it makes me. Season 7, Episode 3, A, aired July 19th, 2009. In this episode, Plankton steals Sandy's fur while she's in the Krusty Krab kitchen. He literally takes her skin. He peels off her pelt and wears it as a disguise to try to steal the Krabby Patty formula. And Sandy, now furless and exposed, runs through Bikini Bottom trying to get her fur back. And the episode ends with Sandy being arrested for public nudity. And look, I know SpongeBob has always pushed boundaries. I know the show has always played in uncomfortable territory. but this episode genuinely bothers me, and I think it says something about how the later seasons viewed Sandy. She's stripped, she's humiliated, she's arrested for a situation that was done to her, not by her, and the episode treats it as a joke. The punchline is that Sandy, the toughest, most capable character in the entire show, is reduced to a naked, vulnerable, publicly shamed figure. And I don't think that lands the same way it would if they'd done it to any other character, because Sandy is already the outsider. She's already the one who has to protect herself more than anyone else. And taking away her literal armor, her fur, the physical layer between her and a world that isn't built for her, feels mean in a way that a lot of seasons 6 through 8, SpongeBob feels mean. Okay, I need to take a breath here. I know I'm being intense about this. I know some of you are probably thinking, it's a cartoon, relax. And you're not wrong. It is a cartoon. But it's a cartoon that, at its best, treated its characters with genuine respect and emotional intelligence. And the gap between how Sandy was written in Season 1 and how she was written in Season 7 is not just a quality decline. It's a philosophical shift. It's the difference between a show that saw Sandy as a person and a show that saw her as a prop. And you know what the real tragedy is? It's that the audience internalized it. People who started watching SpongeBob during Seasons 5, 6, 7, they grew up with lab coat Sandy. They grew up thinking that's who Sandy is. And so when you ask them to rank the characters, of course Sandy's in the middle. Of course she's not as interesting as Squidward or as funny as Patrick. Because the version of Sandy they know isn't the full version. They're working with maybe 30% of the character. And you can't build a compelling argument for a character's greatness when the show itself spent 5 or 6 years showing you only a fraction of what makes her great. This is one of the things that bothers me most about the post-movie era of SpongeBob. It's not just that the episodes were weaker, though many of them were. It's that the weaker episodes actively damaged the audience's perception of the characters. People who tell me Sandy is boring, they're not wrong about the Sandy they saw. They're just wrong about Sandy, and there's a difference. But here's where I want to push back against the idea that Sandy was permanently diminished, because the story doesn't end there. When Hillenburg returned to the show in a supervisory role around Season 9B, something shifted. You can feel it. The character work started to tighten up again. The emotional intelligence came back. And Sandy, while never fully restored to her Season 1 through 3 glory, started to feel like a more complete character again. She got some of her edge back, some of her warmth, some of the complexity that had been stripped away during the middle seasons. I think about Feral Friends, which is technically listed as Season 10, Episode 11, though the season numbering gets confusing with SpongeBob because Nickelodeon has reorganized the seasons multiple times. It aired on October 7th, 2017, and in this episode, a strange moon called the Neptune Moon passes over Bikini Bottom and turns all the sea creatures into their realistic animal forms. SpongeBob becomes an actual sea sponge. Patrick becomes a real starfish. Squidward becomes an actual octopus. And Sandy, because she's already a land animal, because she's already real in a way the others aren't, is the only one unaffected. She's the only one who stays herself. And she has to save everyone. And I love that so much, because it's a perfect metaphor for everything Sandy has always been. When the veneer of civilization falls away, when the cartoon logic breaks down, when everyone else loses what makes them who they are, Sandy is still standing. She's the most grounded character in the show, literally and figuratively. She comes from a different world. She lives in a bubble. She breathes a different air. And that separateness, that fundamental difference that makes her the outsider, is the exact thing that saves everyone when the world stops making sense. Think about that. The thing that makes Sandy different, the thing that isolates her, the thing that puts her in a spacesuit while everyone else swims free, is also the thing that makes her indispensable. Her otherness is her superpower, and I don't think the show has ever made that point more clearly than it does in Feral Friends. And there's another layer to that episode that I want to dig into, because I think it reveals something about how the show's writers, even the later ones, understood Sandy on some level. When the Neptune Moon turns everyone feral, there's this shot of Sandy standing in the middle of Bikini Bottom, surrounded by mindless animals, completely alone and completely herself. And for a moment, the show strips away every other character's personality. SpongeBob isn't optimistic anymore. Squidward isn't cynical. Patrick isn't funny. They're just animals. And Sandy is the only one who remains a person. That's the show accidentally admitting something that I've been arguing this whole video. Sandy is the most real character in SpongeBob SquarePants. She's the one with the most grounded connection to the actual world. And when you remove the cartoon veneer from everyone else, she's the only one left standing, because she was always standing on solid ground. I also want to mention A Flea in Her Dome, Season 5, Episode 10, A, which aired August 1st, 2007. Sandy comes back from a trip to Texas and accidentally brings a flea into her tree dome. The flea multiplies, the tree dome gets infested, and SpongeBob and Patrick, who are visiting, get caught in the middle of this escalating flea crisis. Now, this is a middle-era episode, and it's not one of the show's best, but there's a detail in it that I think is worth talking about. The episode shows Sandy coming back from Texas. It shows her returning to Bikini Bottom. And there's this moment, this really quick moment, when she steps back into the tree dome after being away, where she looks around at her tree and her grass and her picnic table, and you can see that she's glad to be home. Not glad to be back in Texas. Glad to be back in the dome. The dome is home now. And that quiet shift, that evolution from Texas is home in Season 1 to the tree dome is home in Season 5, tells you something about how Sandy's relationship with Bikini Bottom has deepened over time, even when the writing wasn't always acknowledging it. Remember what I said at the beginning about Sandy choosing to be here? This is where that choice starts to calcify into something more permanent. Sandy didn't just choose Bikini Bottom once. She chooses it every day. Every time she comes back from Texas. Every time she puts the suit on. Every time she walks through the airlock. The choice renews itself, and each renewal makes it a little more real, a little more final, a little more like the kind of commitment that reshapes your identity. Alright, let me talk about Carolyn Lawrence, because I think the conversation about Sandy being underrated is incomplete without talking about the performance behind the character. Lawrence has been voicing Sandy since May 1st, 1999. That's over 26 years. She auditioned with just a one-sheet drawing of the character and a paragraph of dialogue, and she's talked about how she was terrified during her first recording session because the rest of the cast was so accomplished. Tom Kenny, who voices SpongeBob, was already a veteran voice actor. Bill Fagerbacka, who voices Patrick, had been on Coach for years. Roger Bumpass, who voices Squidward, had decades of voice work under his belt. And there's Lawrence, coming in as a relatively unknown, sitting behind Doug Lawrence, who voices Plankton, and Roger Bumpass, throwing paper clips at them while waiting for her turn at the microphone. And here's what I think Carolyn Lawrence did with Sandy that doesn't get enough recognition. She gave the character range. Sandy's accent isn't a gimmick. It's not a one-note Texas drawl played for laughs. When Sandy is angry, the accent gets harder, more clipped, more dangerous. When Sandy is vulnerable, when she's singing that song in Texas, or realizing she's been hurt in squirrel jokes, the accent softens. It gets warmer, almost fragile. Lawrence can shift between ferocious and tender in a single line read, and that's not something you can teach. That's instinct. That's an actor who understands their character at a level that goes beyond the script. I actually went back and listened to Sandy's scenes in a bunch of episodes with headphones on, just focusing on the voice work, and the thing that struck me is how physical Lawrence's performance is. You can hear the effort in Sandy's voice when she's wrestling something. You can hear the breath, the strain. When Sandy lands a karate chop, Lawrence doesn't just say the line. She commits with her whole body. You can hear her moving in the recording booth. And that physicality, that energy, is what separates Sandy from every other smart character in animation. Sandy doesn't sound like a scientist. She doesn't sound like an exposition machine. She sounds like a person who lives hard and thinks hard and feels hard, and that's Carolyn Lawrence making a choice in every single session for over 2 decades. Lawrence has talked in interviews about how Steven Hillenburg would tell her to slow down during recording. She'd come in with all this energy, this excitement about the character, and Hillenburg would pull her back, help her find the pacing, the timing. And I think that collaboration between Lawrence's raw energy and Hillenburg's restraint is what made Sandy feel so real in those early seasons. It's what gave her scenes that lived in quality, that sense that Sandy has a whole life happening when the camera isn't on her. She's not waiting in a void for SpongeBob to need her. She's doing things, building things, training, studying, living, and that's something the recording process itself reinforces. SpongeBob voice sessions are famously ensemble affairs. The cast records together, feeding off each other's energy, improvising, playing off the chemistry that 20-plus years of working together creates. Lawrence has described the sessions as feeling like being back in elementary school, with the same seats, the same playful chaos, the same energy. She'd sit behind Mr. Lawrence, who voices Plankton, and Roger Bumpass, and throw paper clips at them. Tom Kenny, who she's described as endlessly generous as a scene partner, creates an atmosphere where everyone can play. And within that atmosphere, Lawrence has to find Sandy's specific frequency every single time. Not too aggressive, not too soft, not too southern, not too neutral. The Texas has to feel real, but not cartoonish. The intelligence has to feel grounded, but not cold. And every line read, every single one across 26 years, has to hit that target. I also want to mention that Lawrence has said her favorite recording sessions were when Ernest Borgnine and Tim Conway were in the booth, voicing Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy. She described them as legends, as hilarious, as the kind of performers who elevated everyone around them. And I think there's something fitting about that, because Sandy's role in the show is similar. She elevates the scenes she's in. She raises the stakes. She raises the intelligence of the conversation. She raises the emotional bar. Like Borgnine and Conway in the recording booth, Sandy makes everything around her better by being excellent at what she does. You know what's funny is, I think one of the reasons Sandy gets overlooked in fan discussions is actually tied to one of her best qualities. She's not messy. SpongeBob is a walking emotional crisis. Squidward is perpetually miserable. Patrick is a lovable disaster. Mr. Krabs is consumed by greed. Plankton is consumed by ambition. Every other major character in SpongeBob has a flaw that generates comedy and conflict and memorable moments. Sandy's flaw, if you can call it that, is that she's too competent, too put together, too good at what she does. And that makes her less quotable, less memeable, less likely to generate those iconic moments of absurdity that SpongeBob is known for. But I think that's exactly why she matters. Because Bikini Bottom needs someone who has their life together. The show needs a character who functions as an anchor, a point of stability in a world that runs on chaos. And Sandy is that anchor. She's the character who, when everything goes wrong, when the worms attack, or the jellyfish revolt, or Plankton's latest scheme threatens the entire town, shows up and actually solves the problem. Not through luck, like SpongeBob sometimes does. Not through dumb persistence, like Patrick. Through competence. Through preparation. Through being genuinely, consistently capable. And the show benefits from that in ways that I think are invisible if you're not looking for them. Every time SpongeBob goes to Sandy's tree dome, the show gets to do something it can't do anywhere else. Put its characters in an environment that's actively hostile to them. The tree dome sequences are some of the most physically creative in the entire series, because the writers and animators have to work with a different set of rules. No water, no floating, no easy breathing. The characters move differently in the tree dome. They behave differently. The comedy is different. And all of that variety, all of that creative flexibility exists because Sandy exists. Because someone had to be different. Someone had to break the rules of the world so that the world itself could expand. Sandy's difference isn't just a character trait, it's a narrative engine. It generates stories that no other character can generate. There's this thing that writers talk about sometimes, the idea of a complication character. A character whose very existence complicates the story in productive ways. Sandy is the ultimate complication character. Her presence in Bikini Bottom raises questions that the show has to answer. How does she breathe? How does she eat? How does she interact with the water world? How do the other characters interact with her air world? Every one of those questions becomes a story. Every one of those complications becomes an episode. And the fact that Sandy exists means the writers have a permanent source of friction, of difference, of productive incompatibility that keeps the show from ever becoming too comfortable. And I think that's one more reason she's underrated. Because the work she does for the show is structural. It's foundational. It's the kind of thing you don't notice until you try to imagine the show without it, like load-bearing walls in a building. You don't think about them when you're living in the house, but if you took them out, the whole thing would collapse, and the show never rewards her for it. Think about that. SpongeBob gets his happiness. Squidward gets his suffering, which the show treats as a kind of cosmic comedy. Patrick gets his ignorance. Mr. Krabs gets his money. What does Sandy get? She gets to be useful. She gets to save the day and then go back to her tree dome, alone, in a bubble, while everyone else goes home to a world that doesn't require protective equipment to exist in. Sandy Cheeks is the most competent character in SpongeBob SquarePants, and her reward for that competence is solitude. I need to talk about the tree dome for a minute, because I think it's one of the most symbolically rich locations in the entire show, and people treat it like set dressing. The tree dome is a glass dome at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, filled with air, containing a single oak tree, some grass, a picnic table, and Sandy's living quarters. It was built by her employers, who in some versions of the lore are connected to a research organization. It has an airlock so that sea creatures can enter without flooding the space. It's a self-contained biome, a bubble of one world, preserved inside another. And every time a character enters the tree dome, they have to wear a water helmet. Every time Sandy leaves the tree dome, she has to wear an air helmet. The boundary between Sandy's world and everyone else's world is always visible, always present, always requiring accommodation. Nobody else in SpongeBob lives like this. SpongeBob walks out his front door, and he's in the ocean. Patrick lifts his rock, and he's in the ocean. Sandy walks out her front door, and she's in a vestibule that slowly drains the air and fills with water so she doesn't drown before she can put her suit on. That's isolation designed into her daily routine. That's loneliness built into her architecture, and the show treats it as normal. SpongeBob visits the tree dome and puts on his water helmet, and it's a funny little detail, but the reality of what it represents is that Sandy cannot share her space with her friends without them needing protective equipment. Her world is hostile to them. Their world is hostile to her. And the dome, this beautiful transparent bubble, is the barrier that keeps her alive and keeps her separate, all at the same time. I think Steven Hillenburg, with his marine biology background, understood something about ecosystems that he wove into Sandy's character at a fundamental level. In nature, when an organism exists outside its native ecosystem, it has to create a microenvironment to survive. It has to carry its world with it. And that's what Sandy does. She carries Texas with her, literally, in a dome full of air and grass and trees. She carries her world on her back, every day, in a place that would kill her if she let her guard down for a single moment. And she does it willingly. She does it joyfully. She chose this. She chose to leave the surface, to leave the sun and the wind and the open sky, to live at the bottom of the ocean in a glass bubble because she wanted to explore, because her curiosity was bigger than her comfort, because Sandy Cheeks would rather live in a hostile world where she can discover new things than stay in a safe world where she already knows everything. And if that's not the most deeply human thing a cartoon squirrel has ever done, I don't know what is. And you know what? Before I circle back to the thesis, I want to take one more tangent, because I think it's earned. I've been spending a lot of time on fan forums while putting this video together, reading what people say about Sandy, reading tier lists, reading character analyses. And one thing I've noticed is that the people who love Sandy the most tend to be people who've experienced being an outsider in some significant way. People who moved to a new country. People who went to a school where they didn't fit in. People who walked into a workplace where everyone else shared a culture or a background that they didn't have. And I think that's not a coincidence. I think Sandy speaks to a very specific kind of human experience, the experience of being the only one. And if you've had that experience, she resonates on a frequency that other characters don't. I saw someone on a SpongeBob forum once, years ago, write something about Sandy that I've never forgotten. They said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that Sandy is the character who taught them it was okay to be homesick and okay to stay. That you could miss where you came from with your whole heart and still choose where you are with your whole heart. And those two feelings didn't cancel each other out. They just coexisted. Like air and water. Like Texas and Bikini Bottom. Like a squirrel and an ocean. That's what Sandy Cheeks means to people. Not to everyone. Not to the fans who just want the memes and the funny moments and the iconic lines, but to the people who needed her. The ones who were the only one of their kind in a room full of people who were different. The ones who built their own tree dome, their own little bubble of home, in the middle of a world that wasn't made for them. Sandy is their character, and she has been since May 1st, 1999, standing on a platform at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, wrestling clams and building rockets and singing songs about a state she might never see again, and refusing, absolutely refusing, to be anything less than exactly who she is. Let me circle back to the thesis, because I want to be really clear about what I'm arguing here. Sandy Cheeks is not underrated because she's secretly the best character. She's not underrated because she has the funniest lines or the most iconic moments or the deepest emotional arcs. Though I'd argue her emotional arcs are deeper than most people realize. Sandy Cheeks is underrated because the show gave her the most difficult job of any character in the cast, and she did it so well that most people don't even notice she's doing it. Sandy is the bridge. She's the character who connects Bikini Bottom to the real world, who connects the ocean to the surface, who connects the absurd cartoon logic of SpongeBob's universe to something grounded and recognizable. When Sandy talks about Texas, she's connecting the show to actual geography. When she builds an invention, she's connecting the show to actual science, or at least a cartoonish version of it. When she hibernates, she's connecting the show to actual biology. Sandy is the character who reminds you that this underwater world, for all its silliness, exists inside a larger reality. And that larger reality has rules, has consequences, has physics and weather, and seasons and species that behave according to their nature. Without Sandy, Bikini Bottom is a sealed-off fantasy. With Sandy, it's a fantasy that knows it's a fantasy. And that self-awareness, that grounding, is what keeps the show from floating off into pure nonsense. Sandy is the gravity of SpongeBob SquarePants. She's the weight that keeps the balloon from flying away. I want to talk about some specific later episodes that I think deserve more attention than they get, because the conversation about Sandy shouldn't stop at Season 3. There are moments scattered throughout the show's entire run that prove the character still had something to offer, even when the writing wasn't consistently supporting her. Rodeo Days, Season 7, Episode 12B, aired February 6th, 2010. Sandy gets an invitation to a rodeo back in Texas, and she's planning to go, and SpongeBob becomes convinced that rodeos are dangerous and that Sandy will get hurt, so he gathers all of Bikini Bottom to go to the surface and save her. And the episode itself is pretty middle of the road for Season 7, I'll be honest. But there's a moment in it that stuck with me. When Sandy is talking about the rodeo, her face lights up. Her accent gets stronger. She's genuinely excited in a way that you don't see from Sandy very often in the later seasons, because the later seasons mostly have her in a lab coat behind a desk. And in that moment, you see the Sandy from Texas. You see the Sandy who misses her home. You see the Sandy who carries two worlds inside her. And it's a reminder that the character was always there, buried under seasons of diminished writing, waiting for someone to let her out again. There's also Whelk Attack, Season 7, Episode 22B, aired October 2nd, 2010. Giant whelks invade Bikini Bottom. Everyone panics. And Sandy, once again, is the one who steps up. She's the one who fights. She's the one who protects. And there's a pattern here that I want to call explicit attention to, because I think the show does it so consistently that people stop noticing it. Whenever Bikini Bottom faces a physical threat, a monster, an invasion, a natural disaster, the narrative turns to Sandy. Not to SpongeBob, who's the hero of the show. Not to Mr. Krabs, who has the resources. Not to anyone else. To Sandy. Because she's the one who's equipped for it. She's the one who knows how to fight, how to strategize, how to put her body between the danger and the people she cares about. And every time she does it, every time she saves the town goes back to normal, and Sandy goes back to her dome. No parade, no key to the city, no lasting recognition. Just Sandy, walking home through the ocean in her spacesuit, alone. And I keep thinking about that walk. The walk from wherever the crisis was back to the tree dome. The walk that nobody sees. The walk where Sandy takes off the armor and becomes just a squirrel in a tree again. I think there's an entire season's worth of storytelling in that walk, and the show never tells it. We never see Sandy process the aftermath. We never see her sit in her tree dome after saving the entire town and think about what she just did. We never see the toll, and that absence, that blind spot, is part of what makes Sandy underrated. The show takes her contributions for granted in exactly the same way the town takes them for granted. She saves, she serves, she solves, and then the camera moves on. Mooncation, Season 8, Episode 9, A, aired November 10th, 2011. Sandy goes on a trip to the moon, and SpongeBob stows away. And I actually think this episode is underrated in its own right, because it's one of the few later season episodes that genuinely engages with Sandy's adventurous side. She's not in a lab. She's not explaining science to SpongeBob. She's strapping herself into a rocket and going to space, because that's the kind of person she is. And SpongeBob tagging along and causing chaos on the moon is classic SpongeBob and Sandy dynamic. It's not at the level of the early seasons, but it's a reminder of what that dynamic looks like when the writers let Sandy be more than her IQ. And then there's the later Renaissance. The show has had multiple creative shifts, and I want to be fair about the fact that from Season 9B onward, when Hillenburg came back in a more active supervisory capacity before his passing in November 2018, things improved, not just for Sandy, but for the show as a whole. The character work tightened, the emotional beats got more precise, and Sandy benefited from that. Squirrel Jelly, Season 11, aired November 18th, 2018. Sandy tries to join SpongeBob and Patrick in jellyfishing and brings her own intense competitive approach to it. And the episode is fun. It's kinetic. Sandy is aggressive and physical and alive in a way that early season Sandy always was. She's not there to explain anything. She's there to compete, to win, to throw herself into something physical with total abandon. And watching it, I thought, there she is. There's the Sandy I've been missing. The one who doesn't just know things. The one who does things. The one who puts her body on the line and her pride on the table and goes all in on whatever she's doing, because that's who Sandy Cheeks is at her core. Not a scientist, not an inventor, an adventurer, a competitor, a person who is fundamentally, constitutionally incapable of doing anything halfway. Now, I want to circle back to something I brought up earlier about the fan community and Sandy's place in it, because it connects to what I was saying about her competence being mistaken for simplicity. In the SpongeBob fandom, the most discussed, most analyzed, most passionately defended characters are SpongeBob and Squidward. And that makes sense. SpongeBob is the protagonist, and Squidward is the character most adult fans identify with. But the third most discussed character isn't Sandy. It's Patrick, or Plankton, or sometimes Mr. Krabs. Sandy exists in this weird middle ground where everyone acknowledges she's a good character, but nobody treats her like a great one. And I think the meme economy has a lot to do with this. SpongeBob's face has been the template for thousands of memes. Squidward's existential misery has been turned into an entire genre of internet humor. Patrick's stupidity gave us, "Is this a butterfly?" and "No, this is Patrick." Mr. Krabs gave us the blur meme. Even Plankton has his moments. But Sandy doesn't have an iconic meme. She doesn't have a single image that went massively viral and redefined how people think about the character. And in the internet age, where a character's cultural currency is increasingly measured by their mimetic presence, that absence matters. It doesn't mean Sandy is less interesting. It means she's less reducible. You can't capture what Sandy Cheeks is in a single screenshot, because what she is takes 11 minutes of storytelling to convey. She's not a punchline. She's a thesis. And here's where it gets personal for me. When I first started watching SpongeBob as a kid, I didn't think about Sandy that much. She was just there. The squirrel in the dome. The one who did karate. And it wasn't until I rewatched the show as an adult, years later, when I'd lived through some things, when I'd moved to a place that wasn't where I grew up, when I'd felt what it's like to be the only person like you in a room full of people who are different, that Sandy clicked. That I understood what the show was doing with her. That I saw the tree dome not as a funny set piece, but as a metaphor for every apartment I'd ever lived in, where I felt like I was breathing different air from the people around me. Sandy didn't change. I did. And the show was patient enough to wait for me to catch up. I think that's why Sandy resonates differently with adults than with kids. Kids see the action hero, the karate master, the Texas accent. Adults see the isolation, the determination, the quiet cost of living somewhere you chose, but that will never fully be yours. And both readings are valid. Both readings are present in the text. But the adult reading is the one that makes Sandy extraordinary, and it's the one that most fan discussions completely miss. And that brings me to something I've been wanting to talk about since I started putting this video together. In 2024, Netflix released Saving Bikini Bottom, the Sandy Cheeks movie. It dropped on August 2nd and racked up 12.8 million views in its opening weekend, making it Netflix's most watched title that week. It was the first SpongeBob movie to skip theaters entirely, and the reception was mixed. Critics found it acceptable, but uninspired. Fans were divided. The animation style was different, a hybrid of CG and stop-motion techniques. The plot involved Sandy and SpongeBob traveling to the surface after a corporation scoops Bikini Bottom out of the ocean. And honestly, I have complicated feelings about it. On one hand, I think it's significant that Sandy got her own movie. That after 25 years, after being sidelined for entire seasons, after being reduced to the science friend, the show's creators looked at Sandy Cheeks and said, "This character deserves to headline a feature film." Carolyn Lawrence has talked about hearing whispers of a Sandy project and being in shock when it was confirmed. And that recognition, that acknowledgement that Sandy is important enough to carry a movie, matters. It matters because for a long time, it felt like the people making SpongeBob had forgotten how important she was. On the other hand, I think the movie reflects some of the same problems that plagued Sandy in the later seasons. The focus on Sandy as a scientist, the plot centered on her research organization, the surface world adventure that pulls her out of Bikini Bottom, rather than exploring what she means within it. The movie is fine. It's a perfectly acceptable kids movie. But it doesn't feel like the Sandy Cheeks movie I would have wanted. I wanted the Sandy from Texas. The Sandy from Squirrel Jokes. The Sandy who sits on top of her dome and sings about missing home and then gets so angry at people insulting her state that she chases them through the entire city. I wanted the complicated Sandy, the full Sandy, and instead, we got the science Sandy, the capable Sandy, which is still Sandy. It's just not all of her. Let me also say something about how the movies have treated Sandy overall, because I think it tells a story. In the SpongeBob SquarePants movie from 2004, the one Hillenburg intended as the series finale, Sandy has a relatively minor role. She's there, she supports SpongeBob, but the movie is really about SpongeBob and Patrick's journey, and I think that was a conscious choice by Hillenburg. Not a diminishment of Sandy, but an understanding that the movie needed to be about SpongeBob's core identity crisis, his need to prove he's not just a kid. Sandy's story, the outsider story, the belonging story, was a different movie, and to Hillenburg's credit, he didn't try to cram it in where it didn't fit. In the SpongeBob movie, Sponge Out of Water. From 2015, Sandy gets more screen time and actually goes to the surface with the rest of the cast, which is interesting, because the surface is her world. And there's a moment in that movie where Sandy is on land, and she's the most comfortable of all of them. She's the one who knows how this world works, and it inverts the usual dynamic completely. In Bikini Bottom, Sandy is the outsider who has to adapt. On the surface, she's the native, and everyone else is lost. That inversion is great. It's a perfect illustration of how environment shapes power dynamics, but the movie doesn't dwell on it as long as I would have liked. And then there's Sponge on the Run from 2020, which has its own energy and its own problems, and doesn't give Sandy a whole lot to work with. And then Saving Bikini Bottom in 2024. 4 movies across 20 years, and Sandy has never been the emotional center of any of them until the last one. And even then, the execution fell short of what the character deserved. I know I keep coming back to this point, but I think it's the key to everything. Sandy Cheeks was designed to be complex. She was designed to carry contradictions. She's a land animal who chose to live underwater. She's a Texan who lives in a New England-accented cartoon town. She's the toughest person in a city full of fish, and she's also the most isolated. She's confident to the point of overconfidence, and she's vulnerable in ways she doesn't always let people see. She's smart, and she's physical. She's independent, and she needs her friends. She's home, and she's homesick, all at the same time. And when the show honored those contradictions, when it let Sandy be all of those things at once, she was extraordinary. When the show forgot those contradictions, when it picked one trait and ran with it, she became ordinary. And Sandy Cheeks should never be ordinary. Let me talk about what Sandy means thematically, because I think there's a layer to this character that most analyses miss entirely. Every major character in SpongeBob represents something about the human condition. SpongeBob is optimism. Squidward is disillusionment. Patrick is blissful ignorance. Mr. Krabs is greed. Plankton is envy. Gary is loyalty. Mrs. Puff is anxiety. And Sandy? Sandy is the immigrant experience. I'm not being hyperbolic. Think about it. Sandy left her home country, voluntarily, to live in a place where she doesn't fit, where she has to wear special equipment to survive, where the people around her don't always understand her customs, her food, her accent, her way of life, where she's simultaneously respected for her abilities and othered for her differences, where she works harder than almost anyone else just to maintain her place, where she builds a home that's a recreation of the world she left behind, a little piece of Texas at the bottom of the ocean, because she needs that connection to who she used to be, even as she becomes who she's becoming. And I don't think I'm reading too much into this. I really don't. Because here's the thing about SpongeBob SquarePants that I think a lot of casual viewers don't appreciate. Stephen Hillenburg was a marine biologist. He studied ecosystems. He understood adaptation at a scientific level. He knew what it meant for an organism to exist outside its natural habitat. And when he created Sandy Cheeks, a land mammal living underwater, he wasn't just making a funny character. He was building a character who embodies the concept of adaptation in every aspect of her existence. Her suit, her dome, her daily routine, her relationships, every part of Sandy's life is shaped by the fact that she is, biologically, not supposed to be where she is. And she does it anyway. That's not subtext, that's text. The show is telling you this directly. Texas is an episode about homesickness. Squirrel Jokes is an episode about discrimination. Pressure is an episode about the constant need to prove you belong. Tea at the Tree Dome is an episode about the awkwardness and danger of entering someone else's space for the first time. Every major Sandy episode is, in some way, about the experience of being an outsider who has chosen to make a foreign place their home. And Stephen Hillenburg, who spent years teaching marine biology at the Ocean Institute in Dana Point, California, who made a career out of explaining the underwater world to people who don't live in it, understood something about that experience. He understood the loneliness of it, the courage of it, the joy and the cost and the strange beauty of choosing to exist somewhere you weren't born. And he gave all of that understanding to Sandy. And there's another element of the immigrant metaphor I haven't talked about yet, and I want to get to it because I think it's the part that hits the hardest. Sandy maintains her culture. She never stops being Texan. She never assimilates to the point where she loses herself. The dome is full of air and grass and a tree that she maintains. She keeps her accent. She keeps her rodeo skills. She keeps her pride in where she's from. And the show never frames this as a problem. It never suggests that Sandy needs to become more like the fish to be accepted. It never suggests that her differentness is a flaw to be overcome. Sandy holds on to her identity and she integrates into a new community, and she does both at the same time. And the show treats both impulses as equally valid, as equally important, as equally Sandy. And in a world where immigrant characters in media are often forced to choose, where the narrative usually demands assimilation or rejection, Sandy Cheeks exists as a quiet refusal of that binary. She doesn't choose between Texas and Bikini Bottom. She holds both. The dome itself is the physical manifestation of that refusal, a piece of the surface preserved underwater, not as a rejection of the ocean, but as a statement that you don't have to abandon who you were to become who you are, that you can carry your old world with you into your new one. That home isn't a place you leave behind. It's a thing you build, wherever you happen to be standing. I think about that every time I see Sandy sitting under her tree. That tree, growing in a dome at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, surrounded by water on all sides, is the most defiant thing in the entire show. It shouldn't exist. There's no biological reason for a tree to be alive at the bottom of the sea, but Sandy keeps it alive. She maintains the atmosphere. She tends the soil. She makes sure the thing that connects her to who she used to be continues to grow, even in an environment that would kill it in seconds if she stopped caring for it. That tree is Sandy's heart, and the fact that she tends it every day in a world that doesn't understand why she needs it tells you everything about who this character is. And Sandy is the proof of that message. She's the show's living argument that you can be curious and strong and smart and lonely and proud and vulnerable and all of those things at the same time, and none of them cancel each other out. She's the character who shows you that you don't have to be one thing, that you can carry Texas in your heart and Bikini Bottom in your bones and a tree dome on your back and still be whole, still be yourself, still be enough. I want to talk briefly about how Sandy interacts with the other characters beyond SpongeBob, because I think those dynamics reveal things about her that the SpongeBob-Sandy friendship doesn't. Take Sandy and Squidward, for example. They don't interact a lot, but when they do, there's this interesting energy. Squidward, who is cynical about everything, who dismisses everything as beneath him, doesn't dismiss Sandy. He doesn't condescend to her the way he condescends to SpongeBob and Patrick. And I think that's because Sandy doesn't give him the opening. She's not naive. She's not annoying. She's competent and self-possessed and speaks directly. And Squidward, who has no patience for incompetence, respects that. He might not like spending time with her, because Squidward doesn't like spending time with anyone, but he doesn't look down on her. And for Squidward, that's practically a declaration of admiration. Sandy and Mr. Krabs don't have a lot of deep interaction either, but when they do, there's this unspoken acknowledgement that they're both, in their own ways, the most pragmatic people in Bikini Bottom. Mr. Krabs is pragmatic about money. Sandy is pragmatic about survival. They both operate with a clear-eyed understanding of what the world requires, and while their priorities are completely different, there's a mutual recognition there. Mr. Krabs doesn't treat Sandy like a charity case. He treats her like an equal. And given that Mr. Krabs treats almost everyone as a source of revenue, his neutrality towards Sandy is actually a form of respect. And Sandy and Patrick, this is a dynamic I think deserves its own video, honestly. Because Patrick is, in many ways, Sandy's opposite. He's incurious. He's passive. He's content to exist without understanding anything about the world around him. And Sandy, who is defined by her curiosity, her drive to understand and explore and conquer, finds Patrick genuinely baffling. There are moments in the show where Sandy looks at Patrick and you can see her trying to compute, trying to figure out how someone can be so thoroughly uninterested in the mechanics of their own existence. And I think Patrick baffles Sandy, not because he's stupid, but because he represents a way of living that Sandy finds incomprehensible. To just be. To not strive. To not build or invent or fight or compete. To sit under a rock and eat and sleep and be happy. Sandy can't fathom it. And there's something almost poignant about that. About a character who is so driven, so relentlessly active, so constitutionally incapable of stillness, encountering a character who is pure stillness. They're mirror images, and neither one fully understands what they're looking at. I think about the fact that Hillenburg was a marine biologist who became an animator. He left one world for another. He took his knowledge of the ocean and translated it into a cartoon, and in doing so, he created a character who does the same thing in reverse. Sandy takes her knowledge of the surface and translates it into life underwater. She's Hillenburg's reflection, his inverse, the character who makes the leap he made, but in the opposite direction. And I don't know if Hillenburg ever said that explicitly. I don't know if he ever sat in an interview and said, "Sandy Cheeks is me." But I feel it. Every time I watch Texas, every time I see Sandy standing in her dome, looking up through the glass at the ocean above her, I feel it. She's someone who left home because the world was too interesting to stay put, and she carries that home with her everywhere she goes. Let me shift to talking about Sandy's relationships, because I think they're more nuanced than people give them credit for. The Sandy-SpongeBob friendship is the most obvious one, and it's the one the show has explored most consistently. But what makes it work? What makes it feel real, in a way that SpongeBob's friendship with Patrick sometimes doesn't, is that Sandy and SpongeBob genuinely respect each other. Not just emotionally, intellectually, physically. Sandy doesn't think SpongeBob is an idiot. She thinks he's a goofball. Sure, she knows he's not the sharpest tool in the shed when it comes to science or common sense. But she's seen him do things that nobody else in Bikini Bottom can do. She's seen his kindness, his persistence, his absurd, inexhaustible will to be happy. And she respects that. She respects it because she recognizes it. Because Sandy has that same will. That same refusal to give up. That same insistence on being joyful in a world that gives her plenty of reasons not to be. And SpongeBob, for his part, doesn't see Sandy as the smart one, or the tough one, or the Texas one. He sees her as Sandy, his friend, the person he does karate with, the person he visits in the tree dome, the person he threw a party for when she wanted to leave. Their friendship isn't based on what Sandy can do for him, it's based on who she is. And in a show full of transactional relationships, full of characters who are using each other, or annoying each other, or exploiting each other, Sandy and SpongeBob's friendship is one of the few that feels purely genuine. I've been thinking about why that matters, and I keep coming back to the idea that Sandy needed that friendship more than she lets on. Because Sandy is proud. Sandy is tough. Sandy doesn't ask for help. She doesn't admit weakness. She doesn't break down in front of people. And SpongeBob is the one character in the show who gets past those walls, not by being smarter or stronger or more perceptive, but by being so persistently, aggressively kind that Sandy can't keep him out. He just shows up. He just keeps showing up. And eventually, Sandy lets him in. That's what the tree dome represents, when you really think about it. It's Sandy's wall. It's the barrier she built between herself and a world that isn't made for her. And SpongeBob puts on a water helmet and walks through the airlock and sits at the picnic table. And for a little while, Sandy isn't alone. She's still in her bubble. She's still breathing different air. But someone is there with her. Someone made the effort. Someone said, "I know your world is different from mine, and I'm going to enter it anyway. Because you're worth the discomfort. And if you've made it this far into this video, if you're still here with me at this point, I think you understand something about Sandy that a lot of people don't. You understand that she's not a side character who occasionally gets her own episode. She's the structural backbone of the show's thematic argument. Without Sandy, SpongeBob is a show about funny ocean creatures doing funny things. With Sandy, it's a show about what it means to live in a world that isn't yours and find a way to call it home. That's not a minor contribution. That's the entire emotional foundation of the series. And the fact that Sandy carries it so quietly, so unobtrusively, so naturally, that most viewers don't even notice, is the very definition of underrated. And I want to say one more thing about the friendship before I move on. There's an element of trust in the SpongeBob-Sandy relationship that I think is unique in the show. SpongeBob trusts Sandy with his life. Literally. He gets in her rocket. He follows her into fights with worms. He lets her throw him across fields in karate practice. And Sandy trusts SpongeBob with something equally important: her vulnerability. She lets him see her when she's homesick. She lets him into the tree dome when she's hibernating, even if he sometimes violates that trust. She doesn't perform for him the way she performs for the rest of Bikini Bottom. When it's just Sandy and SpongeBob, some of that armor comes off. Not all of it. Sandy Cheeks never takes all the armor off, but some of it. And that some is more than anyone else gets. And honestly, that might be the most beautiful thing in the entire show. Not the gags, not the memes, not the Krabby Patty formula, or Squidward's clarinet, or Patrick's rock. The most beautiful thing in SpongeBob SquarePants is the image of a yellow sponge putting on a water helmet and walking into a glass dome to have tea with a squirrel who misses home. Because that's what friendship looks like when the world makes it hard. That's what showing up looks like when showing up costs something. Okay, I want to talk about one more thing before I start wrapping this up, because I think it's important, and I don't hear people discuss it enough. Sandy Cheeks, specifically in the Hillenburg era episodes, is one of the best female characters in children's animation. Full stop. And I don't say that lightly. Here's what Hillenburg did, and I think it was deliberate. He created a female character who was physically the strongest person in the cast. Not in a girl power, after-school special way. Not in a way that was ever commented on, or highlighted, or turned into a lesson. Sandy is just the strongest. She beats SpongeBob at karate. She wrestles giant clams. She takes on the Alaskan bullworm. She outmuscles everyone. And the show never makes a thing of it. Nobody says, "Wow, a girl doing that." Nobody acts surprised. Sandy's strength is just a fact. The same way SpongeBob's enthusiasm is a fact. Or Squidward's misery is a fact. It's baked into the character at such a fundamental level that it doesn't need to be justified or explained. And she's also the smartest character in the cast. She builds rockets. She conducts experiments. She invented a teleportation device in one episode. She understands chemistry and physics and engineering. And again, the show doesn't make a spectacle of it. Sandy is brilliant. That's just how it is. Move on, and I want to linger on this for a second longer, because I think people don't realize how rare this was in 1999, and how rare it still is. Think about the other Nickelodeon shows of that era. Rugrats had Angelica, who was defined by being bratty and mean. Hey, Arnold had Helga, who was defined by her secret crush on Arnold. The Fairly Odd Parents had Trixie Tang, who was defined by being the popular girl Timmy wanted to date. CatDog had... Actually, I don't think CatDog had a major female character. And there's SpongeBob, casually introducing a female character who's the strongest, smartest, most adventurous person in the cast, and treating it like it's no big deal. Because it shouldn't be a big deal. It should just be how you make characters. But in children's animation in the late 90s, it was revolutionary in its quietness. Sandy didn't wave a banner. She didn't deliver speeches about girl power. She just existed, fully and powerfully, and the show trusted the audience to get it. And she's also not a love interest. Hillenburg was clear about this. Sandy was designed as a friend to SpongeBob, not a romantic partner. In a world where female characters in kids' shows were routinely defined by their relationships to male characters, Sandy existed as her own person, with her own goals, and her own life, and her own reasons for being in the story that had nothing to do with romance. She's there because she wants to be there, because she chose Bikini Bottom, because her curiosity brought her to the ocean floor, and her strength keeps her alive there, and her stubbornness keeps her from ever leaving. That's extraordinary for 1999. That's extraordinary for a Nickelodeon cartoon aimed at children. And you know what else is extraordinary? The consistency of it. Sandy's independence isn't a trait that gets brought up in one episode and forgotten in the next. It's there in every appearance. She never wavers. She never suddenly needs a love interest to complete her arc. She never gets a makeover episode. She never gets a storyline about wanting to be pretty, or popular, or desirable. She wants to do science. She wants to do karate. She wants to go to the moon. She wants to build things and break things and figure out how the universe works. And the show respects those desires consistently across 26 years and hundreds of episodes. That kind of character consistency, especially for a female character in a long-running animated series, is genuinely remarkable. Most shows can't sustain that kind of commitment. Most shows cave to audience pressure or network pressure or the simple laziness of defaulting to easy storylines. SpongeBob, at least in its treatment of Sandy's core identity, never did. And I think it's one of the things Hillenburg cared about most, because every choice he made with Sandy's character was designed to make her feel complete, without needing anyone else to complete her. Sandy doesn't need SpongeBob. She wants him. There's a difference, and that difference is everything. And before I start bringing this home, I want to take one more detour, because I think there's an aspect of Sandy's character that deserves attention and that nobody talks about. Her relationship with failure. Because Sandy does fail. She fails in Sandy, SpongeBob, and the Worm. She fails in Chimps Ahoy, at least initially. She fails in multiple later episodes where her inventions go haywire. And the way Sandy handles failure is different from every other character in the show. SpongeBob fails and stays positive. Patrick fails and doesn't notice. Squidward fails and becomes more bitter. Mr. Krabs fails and counts his losses. Plankton fails and plots revenge. Sandy fails and gets back up. Immediately. Without drama. Without a breakdown. Without a self-pity spiral. She assesses what went wrong. She adjusts. And she tries again. And that resilience, that sheer refusal to let failure define her, is something the show never calls attention to. It's just what Sandy does. It's built into her operating system. And I think it's the most admirable trait any character in the show possesses. Because here's what resilience looks like when you're the only one of your kind. It looks like survival. Sandy doesn't have the luxury of falling apart. She can't afford a bad day in the way that SpongeBob can, because SpongeBob has the ocean. SpongeBob has a world built for him. Sandy has a dome and a suit, and the certain knowledge that if she stops maintaining them, if she lets them fail, she dies. Not metaphorically. Literally. The ocean will kill her. So when her inventions break, when her plans go wrong, when the worm is bigger than she thought, she doesn't get to sit down and feel sorry for herself. She gets back up because getting back up is how she stays alive. And I think that changes the way you read her confidence. People see Sandy's bravado, and they think it's arrogance. They think she's cocky, and sometimes she is. But I think a lot of what looks like arrogance is actually necessity. She has to believe she can handle anything, because the alternative is admitting that she's vulnerable in a way that nobody around her is. The fish aren't wearing survival equipment. SpongeBob isn't one helmet malfunction away from drowning. Sandy is, and she knows it, and so she overcompensates. She's louder, tougher, braver, more confident than she needs to be, because the gap between her and safety is always there, always visible, always one cracked dome away from catastrophe. That's not arrogance. That's armor. And the fact that the show gave her that armor without ever explicitly explaining why she needs it is, I think, some of the most sophisticated character writing in the history of children's animation. I'm going to bring this back around now because we've been going for a while, and I want to make sure the thing I'm saying lands the way I want it to. Sandy Cheeks is the most underrated character in SpongeBob SquarePants because she does the hardest thing any character in the show does, and she makes it look effortless. She lives in a world that isn't built for her. She breathes air that nobody else breathes. She wears a suit everywhere she goes. She fights to belong in a community that, at its worst, mocks her for being different, and at its best, simply takes her for granted. She carries the show's most sophisticated themes: immigration, discrimination, isolation, adaptation, the cost of competence, the loneliness of being the only one of your kind, and she carries them with a Texas accent and a karate chop and a smile that says she wouldn't trade any of it for the world. And here's where I want to connect everything I've been saying into one final thread, because this is what I've been building toward for this entire video. The reason Sandy is underrated isn't one thing. It's the accumulation of many things. It's the Flanderization of her character in the middle seasons that taught a generation of viewers to see her as one-dimensional. It's the absence of a viral meme that would have kept her in the cultural conversation, the way SpongeBob and Squidward and Patrick stayed in it. It's the subtlety of her themes, which require close attention and adult perspective to fully appreciate. It's her competence, which makes her less dramatic and therefore less memorable than characters who are defined by their flaws. It's her isolation, which the show treats as set dressing rather than as the profound metaphor it actually is. And it's the simple fact that in a show called SpongeBob SquarePants, the character who isn't SpongeBob will always be fighting for attention. But all of those factors are external. They're about how the audience and the industry and the internet happen to treat Sandy. They're not about who Sandy is. And who Sandy is, when you strip away the memes and the rankings and the tier lists and the casual dismissals, is the bravest, most resilient, most thematically rich character in one of the most successful animated shows in history. She's a land animal who lives underwater. She's a Texan who lives at the bottom of the Pacific. She's an outsider who chose to stay. And she made that choice not once, but every single day for over 26 years. And the show, at times, forgot that. The later seasons forgot it. The spin-offs forgot it. The fan community, which endlessly debates whether Squidward is the most tragic character, or SpongeBob is the most iconic, or Patrick is the funniest, largely forgot it. But the character is right there. She's been right there since May 1st, 1999. Standing in a glass dome at the bottom of the ocean, surrounded by water she can't breathe, looking up at a sky she chose to leave behind, and deciding every single day to stay. And I want to bring up one more thing before the final stretch, because it connects to everything, and I'd regret not mentioning it. Steven Hillenburg passed away on November 26, 2018, from ALS. He was 57 years old, and when he died, the internet mourned in a way that felt different from any other celebrity death I've witnessed. Because this wasn't just a showrunner. This was the person who built Bikini Bottom, who gave us SpongeBob's laugh and Squidward's despair and Patrick's joy and Sandy's strength. And in the weeks and months after his passing, as tributes poured in and people shared their memories of watching SpongeBob for the first time, I kept thinking about Sandy. About how Hillenburg had created this character who chose to live somewhere she didn't belong, who chose the hard path over the easy one, who chose curiosity over comfort, and how that choice was, in some fundamental way, a reflection of Hillenburg's own path. A marine biologist who chose animation, a scientist who chose art, a man who built a world entirely different from the one he came from, and loved it so much he devoted his life to it. And when I think about Hillenburg's legacy, I think about the fact that he fought to protect the integrity of his show. He fought against Nickelodeon's corporate interests. He fought to keep SpongeBob from becoming purely a merchandise vehicle. He stepped back when he felt he couldn't maintain the quality, and he came back when he felt the show needed him. And through all of that, the character who most embodied his spirit, the character who fought the hardest, who refused to compromise, who insisted on existing on her own terms in a world that wasn't built for her, was Sandy Cheeks. I think there's a reason Sandy was always the character Hillenburg was most protective of. In interviews, the people who worked with him talk about how he had specific visions for each character, but Sandy's vision was always the clearest. She had to be strong. She had to be smart. She had to be independent. She had to be from Texas. And she had to be a friend, not a love interest. Those were non-negotiable for Hillenburg. And I think they were non-negotiable because Sandy was personal to him in a way that the other characters might not have been. SpongeBob was the show's mascot. Squidward was the show's comedy engine. Patrick was the show's heart. But Sandy was the show's compass. She pointed toward the real world. She pointed toward the surface. She pointed toward the fact that there's a whole existence beyond the boundaries of the world you've built. And if you're brave enough, you can cross that boundary and make a home on the other side. And now that world continues without him. Just like Bikini Bottom continues when Sandy goes into hibernation. Just like the ocean keeps moving when Sandy goes back to Texas for a visit. The show goes on. New episodes air. New writers take their shot. And Sandy Cheeks, the character Hillenburg built to embody the courage of starting over in a place that doesn't quite fit, keeps putting on her suit and walking out the door. And I think there's something beautiful about that. Something that Hillenburg would have understood, I hope, if he could see it. I mentioned earlier that Sandy's first appearance was in Tea at the Tree Dome. And there's a detail in that episode that I think about all the time. When SpongeBob first meets Sandy, he doesn't know what air is. He has no concept of it. She invites him to her home, and he walks into a space that is fundamentally hostile to him, a space where he can't survive. And he does it because he wants to impress her. He does it because he's curious. He does it because he met someone different from him, and instead of being afraid, he was fascinated. And Sandy, when she sees that SpongeBob is suffocating, doesn't panic. She doesn't overreact. She doesn't make him feel stupid. She just quietly, efficiently, kindly gives him a water helmet. She adapts her space to accommodate him. She makes room. And that's what Sandy has been doing for the entire run of the show. Making room for SpongeBob, for Patrick, for everyone who enters her world. She doesn't ask them to change. She doesn't ask them to breathe her air. She just gives them what they need to exist alongside her. And in return, she asks for nothing. Just company. Just friendship. Just someone who's willing to put on a helmet and sit at her picnic table and share a glass of Texas tea. When Carolyn Lawrence was asked about her 25 years playing Sandy, she said something that stuck with me. She said her whole adult life has been playing Sandy. Think about that. Lawrence was a young woman when she got this role, and now she's spent decades with this character, growing with her, aging with her, understanding her in ways that nobody else can. And when Lawrence talks about Sandy, there's a warmth in her voice that goes beyond professional pride. She loves this character. You can hear it. You can feel it in the performance. And I think that love, that deep, decades-long understanding of who Sandy is what's kept the character alive, even during the seasons when the writing didn't always serve her. I've been doing this for a while now, and I want to leave you with something. Not an answer. A question. Here's what I keep thinking about. Sandy Cheeks chose to leave the surface. She chose to leave Texas, leave the sun, leave the open sky, leave everything familiar, and live at the bottom of the ocean in a glass dome. And she never went back. Not permanently. She got homesick. She almost left. But she stayed. Every time, she stayed. And the question I keep asking myself, the one I genuinely don't have an answer to, is this. What does it cost her? Not in terms of plot. Not in terms of story mechanics. What does it actually cost a person to live their entire life in a world that isn't made for them? To wake up every morning and put on a suit that keeps them alive? To look through glass at a world they can participate in, but never fully inhabit? To be the strongest, smartest, most capable person in the room and still be the most alone? I don't know. I've been thinking about it for weeks, and I still don't know. Because the show never tells us. Sandy never tells us. Never tells them. She just puts on her helmet and walks out the door and helps whoever needs helping, and then comes home to her tree and takes the suit off and exists for a few hours in the only place where she can just be a squirrel. And I think the reason that image haunts me, the reason Sandy Cheeks is the character I think about at 2 a.m. when I can't sleep, is that I think we all know what it feels like. Maybe not that extreme, maybe not a spacesuit and a glass dome, but that feeling of building a life somewhere you weren't born, of carrying home inside you because you can't go back to it, of waking up every day in a world that asks you to be something slightly different from what you are. And I want to mention one last thing. Carolyn Lawrence, in an interview about the Saving Bikini Bottom movie, said that the project taught her new things about her character after 25 years. 25 years of voicing Sandy Cheeks. And Lawrence is still discovering new things about her. Still finding new facets, new depths, new dimensions to this cartoon squirrel she first brought to life in a recording booth in 1999. That's not common. Voice actors don't usually talk about their characters that way after a quarter century. They talk about them with affection, sure, with pride. But Lawrence talks about Sandy with discovery, like she's still meeting her, still getting to know her. And I think that tells you something about the depth Hillenburg built into this character. He built her deep enough that even the person who knows her best, the person who has literally been her voice for her entire existence, is still finding new rooms in the house. That's the mark of a great character. Not one who's instantly quotable or endlessly memeable, one who keeps revealing herself, one who has more layers than any single viewing can uncover, one who means something different to you at 10 than she does at 20, than she does at 30. Sandy Cheeks is that character. She has been since the beginning. And I think the world is finally starting to catch up. Sandy Cheeks carries that weight. She's been carrying it for over 26 years. And she does it with a smile, and a karate chop, and a yeehaw that echoes through the water. And I think that's the bravest thing any character in SpongeBob SquarePants has ever done. Not SpongeBob's relentless optimism. Not Squidward's endurance. Not Patrick's ability to exist in blissful ignorance. Sandy's bravery. The bravery of choosing, every single day, to be somewhere you don't quite fit, and making it your home anyway. And if you can't sleep tonight, well, that's what the next video is for. Thank you for spending this time with me. I mean that. If you stuck around for all of this, if you let me talk about a cartoon squirrel for this long, then you're my kind of person. Hit subscribe if you haven't. It costs nothing and it means everything. And I'll see you in the next one. Thank you. Good night.